They thought it was just another routine drug corridor inspection along the sun-baked highways of Arizona. The cartel soldiers spotted what looked like an easy target. A modest truck stop with a lone figure they identified as a retired Army veteran, quietly sipping coffee at the counter. What Los Serpientes cartel didn't realize was that Thomas "Ghost" Reynolds wasn't just any former soldier. He was an elite Delta Force operative who had spent 15 years dismantling narco-trafficking operations across Latin America. His unassuming presence at Desert Wind's truck stop was about to transform this quiet waypoint into ground zero of a war that would shake a powerful cartel to its core. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The evening sun cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt of Desert Wind's truck stop, the neon "Open 24/7" sign flickering to life as dusk settled over the Sonoran Desert. Thomas Reynolds sat at his usual spot at the chrome counter, methodically, reviewing satellite maps of the region while nursing his black coffee. 23 years of special operations had ingrained in him a habit of choosing positions with clear sightlines to all entry points while keeping his back protected. Maria Ortiz approached with a fresh pot of coffee, her weathered face carrying the warm smile that had made Desert Winds feel like home to countless truckers over the years. "Need a refill, Ghost?" she asked, already tilting the pot toward his. Thomas nodded gratefully. "Your coffee keeps me sharper than any military-grade stimulant ever did, Maria." The peaceful routine was shattered by the distinctive rumble of 3 black SUVs pulling into the lot, their tinted windows and pristine finish standing out among the working-class trucks. Thomas didn't look up from his maps, but his awareness shifted instantly. Through the reflection in the polished coffee machine, he watched 6 men exit the vehicles, their movements precise, their casual clothing failing to hide their military bearing. He recognized the telltale signs of cartel soldiers, likely former Mexican special forces turned mercenaries. Maria's hand trembled slightly as she set down the coffee pot. "Madre de Dios," she whispered. "Those are the ones Carlos warned us about." Thomas gave her a reassuring nod. "Stay calm, Maria. Just go about your business like normal." The bell above the door chimed as 3 of the men entered, while the others maintained positions outside. The leader, a tall man with a facial scar that stretched from his left ear to his jaw, surveyed the diner with cold efficiency. His eyes lingered on the security cameras, the layout, the handful of customers, 2 truckers, a family of 4 finishing their meal, and Thomas. Sarah Chen, the truck stop's owner, emerged from the kitchen. Her face remained neutral, but Thomas noticed her right hand sliding beneath the counter, where he knew she kept a Mossberg shotgun. "Welcome to Desert Winds. What can I get you, gentlemen?" The scarred man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, we're here to discuss business, Ms. Chen. My name is Victor Reyes, and my organization is interested in establishing a partnership with your establishment." His English was perfect, his tone professional, making him all the more dangerous. Thomas continued studying his maps, but his muscles coiled imperceptibly, ready for action. He'd seen this pattern before, both in the military and after. Cartels, moving into new territory, always started with a veneer of legitimacy before revealing their true intentions. Sarah's voice remained steady. "I appreciate the offer, but Desert Winds isn't looking for any partnerships right now." Reyes's smile tightened. I don't think you understand, Miss Chen. This region is now under new management. Los Serpientes are expanding our interests, and we're here to discuss your role in our operation. Everyone needs protection in these dangerous times. One of Reyes's men wandered toward the family's table, deliberately bumping their young son's chair. The boy whimpered, clutching his father's arm. That's when Thomas spoke, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of unmistakable authority. The lady said she's not interested. The diner fell silent. Reyes turned slowly, seeming to truly notice Thomas for the first time. "Well," he said, his scarred face twisting into a smirk, "it seems we have someone eager to join our conversation." He approached the counter, looming over Thomas. "This is a private business discussion, friend. I suggest you focus on your coffee." Thomas finally looked up from his maps, meeting Reyes's gaze. His eyes were steady, showing neither fear nor aggression. "You're making it my business." He took another sip of coffee, his movements deliberate. "And I've got a pretty good idea what kind of business Los Serpientes is really interested in." Reyes's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You seem to know a lot about things that don't concern you." His hand drifted casually toward his jacket. "I know enough," Thomas replied evenly. "I know you're moving north from Sonora, trying to establish new supply routes. You start with protection at truck stops and diners, then move on to using them as distribution points, clean vehicles, legitimate businesses, perfect cover for moving product across state lines." The second cartel soldier moved forward, his hand reaching behind his back, but Reyes held up a hand to stop him. He studied Thomas more carefully now, noting the military precision of his posture, the way he controlled his space. "You're either very brave or very stupid, old man." "Just a guy trying to enjoy his coffee," Thomas said. "But I've dealt with organizations like yours before. You're making a mistake targeting this truck stop." The third soldier, a heavily muscled man with tribal tattoos on his neck, spat on the floor. "Only mistake is yours, gringo." Thomas didn't react to the provocation. He simply took another sip of his coffee. "Two choices, gentlemen. You can walk out that door, get in your fancy SUVs, and find somewhere else to cause trouble. Or you can try whatever you're thinking about trying, and we'll see how that works out for everyone." Something in Thomas's tone, the absolute certainty in his voice, made the soldiers hesitate. Reyes studied him with new intensity, likely recognizing the bearing of someone intimately familiar with violence. "You're the one making a mistake," Reyes said, though his voice carried a hint of uncertainty. "This isn't over." Thomas nodded slightly. "Actually, it is. For tonight." Reyes backed away slowly, maintaining eye contact. "Vámonos," he ordered his men, though his eyes never left Thomas. As they retreated to their vehicles, Reyes pointed two fingers at his eyes, then at the diner, the universal signal that they'd be watching. Once the SUVs had disappeared into the gathering darkness, the tension in the diner broke. The father from the family approached Thomas, his voice shaking. "Thank you, sir. I don't know what would have happened if—" Thomas cut him off gently. "Nothing was going to happen to your family. Not here." He turned to Sarah. "But you might want to call Sheriff Elena Martinez. Let her know Los Serpientes are moving into her jurisdiction." Sarah nodded, already reaching for the phone. "They'll be back, won't they?" "Yes," Thomas said, returning to his maps. "With more men next time. but we'll be ready." Maria brought him a fresh cup of coffee, her hands still trembling slightly. "What are we going to do?" Thomas looked up at her, his expression softening. "We're going to show them that they picked the wrong truck stop, the wrong community, and definitely the wrong veteran to mess with." As night settled over the desert, Thomas remained at his spot at the counter, his mind already formulating plans. He knew Los Serpientes would return, probably the next night with reinforcements. They couldn't afford to let his challenge go unanswered. It would undermine their attempts to establish territory. But that's exactly what he was counting on. He pulled out his phone and began making calls to other veterans he knew in the region. Former operators, intelligence specialists and warriors who understood that some battles couldn't be ignored. By the time Los Serpientes returned, they'd learned that Desert Winds wasn't just another truck stop. It was a line in the sand that Thomas Reynolds and his community weren't going to let them cross. The desert wind picked up, carrying with it the promise of storms to come. But Thomas Reynolds was ready. He'd spent his life fighting cartels in the shadows. Now it was time to bring that fight into the light and show Los Serpientes what happens when they target the wrong veteran at the wrong truck stop. Dawn broke over Desert Wind's truck stop, painting the Arizona sky in shades of crimson and gold. Thomas had spent the night making calls, reaching out to his network of former operators and intelligence assets. Now, sitting at his usual spot, at the counter, he watched as familiar faces began filtering in. Sarah worked the morning shift herself, pouring coffee for the growing crowd of veterans. "Never seen it this busy this early," Maria remarked, tying her apron as she started her shift. Thomas scanned the room, noting each new arrival. Jack "Sandman" Morrison, a former Navy SEAL sniper, sat nearby cleaning his glasses. 3 tables. Over Mike "Doc" Rodriguez, who'd served as a para-rescue operator in Afghanistan, was deep in conversation with 2 other veterans. None of them were here by coincidence. "Friends of yours?" Sarah asked quietly as she refilled Thomas's cup. "Let's just say we share some common interests," Thomas replied, "particularly in keeping places like this free from cartel influence." The bell above the door chimed as Sheriff Elena Martinez walked in. She was in her late 30s, a former Army military police officer who'd returned home to serve her community. She made her way directly to Thomas, settling onto the adjacent stool. "Heard we had some unwelcome visitors last night," Elena said, accepting the coffee Sarah offered. Her dark eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Thomas turned slightly. "Los Serpientes, 3 vehicles, 6 men, professional, former Mexican Special Forces, if I had to guess." "Yeah, I know about them," Elena nodded. "They've been moving up from Sonora, taking over businesses, establishing distribution points. Had 2 truck stops shut down last month alone due to drug activity." "Figured as much. Their tactics match what I saw during my time with Delta Force. I spent 3 years running counter-narcotics operations along the border. Groups like Los Serpientes, they don't just want to move product. They want to control territory, establish permanent corridors. Modali." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elena's eyebrows raised slightly. "Delta Force. All this time I thought you were just another desert rat passing through." Thomas allowed himself a small smile. "Still am, but before that, I helped dismantle some of the biggest cartels in Latin America. saw groups like Los Serpientes turn quiet communities into war zones. And now they're here, Elena sighed. I've got 3 deputies total, Thomas. If they come in force... They will, Thomas interrupted, but they won't expect what's waiting for them. The conversation halted as the rumble of engines filled the parking lot. Not SUVs this time. 3 armored pickup trucks pulled in, their modified suspensions and reinforced frames indicating they weren't civilian vehicles. Inside the diner, the atmosphere shifted. The regular customers tensed, but the veterans Thomas had called in remained notably calm. Sandman casually adjusted his position, giving himself a clear line to both entrances. Doc Rodriguez stretched, his movements deliberate as he created space around his table. Other veterans positioned themselves strategically throughout the space. This time, 6 men entered as a group, their boots heavy on the linoleum floor. Reyes led them, his scarred face twisted in a scowl. His eyes narrowed as he took in the crowd, obviously not expecting so many people this early. Looks like someone's been busy making calls, Reyes sneered, spotting Thomas. His confidence wavered slightly as he noticed Sheriff Martinez, but he pressed on. Brought some friends this time. Thought we should continue our discussion about the new management situation. Thomas turned slowly on his stool, his movements unhurried. Nothing's changed since last night. This isn't your territory, and it's not going to be. One of the new cartel soldiers, a massive man with a shaved head and gold teeth, stepped forward. You don't get to make that call, pendejo. Stand down, Hector, Reyes warned, studying the room more carefully now. Something about the veteran's calm demeanor had caught his attention. We're just here to talk business, Reyes continued, though his tone had lost some of its smoothness. Los Serpientes are expanding our legitimate enterprises. We're offering protection, investment opportunities. No, Thomas said firmly. You're here to establish a drug distribution point. Same pattern you've used at other stops south of here. Intimidation first, then take over the legitimate business. Use it as a front for moving product. The gold-toothed Hector's hand drifted toward his jacket, but before he could make a move, Sandman's voice cut through the tension. I wouldn't, Sandman said calmly. Not unless you want to find out how many special operations veterans are in this room right now. Reyes's eyes darted around, really seeing the other veterans for the first time. He recognized the way they carried themselves, the disciplined stillness in their postures. These weren't ordinary truckers or local muscle. These were trained warriors, trying to look like ordinary people. You think bringing in a few other old-timers changes anything? Reyes's voice carried less conviction now. This is happening, whether you like it or not. Thomas stood slowly, his movement drawing all eyes. Let me be very clear. I know your operation. I know your supply lines. I spent 2 decades tracking and dismantling organizations like yours. You're not the first to try this, and you won't be the last. But right here, right now, you've got a choice. That right? Reyes's hand twitched near his chest. And what choice is that? Leave. Find somewhere else to peddle your drugs. Because if you push this, if you really want to make Desert Winds your battleground, you're not just taking on me or these people in here. You're taking on an entire community of warriors who've spent their lives dealing with threats bigger than you. The diner had fallen completely silent. Even the regular customers seemed to hold their breath, watching the standoff unfold. Sheriff Martinez remained seated but alert, her hand casually resting near her holster. Hector took another step forward, but Reyes grabbed his arm. Something in Thomas's words, or maybe in the steady gazes of the veterans around the room, had given him pause. "This is your territory, eh?" Reyes's voice dripped with sarcasm, but there was uncertainty beneath it. "No," Thomas replied. "It's everyone's territory. That's what you don't understand. We're not claiming it. We're protecting it." Hector spat on the floor. "Big words from an old man." "Not words," Thomas corrected him. "Promise. You want to test us? Go ahead. But remember, whatever happens next, you chose it." Reyes studied Thomas for a long moment, then looked around the room once more. The odds had shifted dramatically since last night, and he knew it. Finally, he jerked his head toward the door. "Let's go," he ordered his crew. "Plenty of other stops on this highway." As the cartel soldiers filed out, Reyes turned back. "This isn't over." "Yes," Thomas said quietly. "It is. You just don't know it yet." The roar of engines filled the air as the armored trucks departed. Inside, the tension slowly bled out of the room. Sarah let out a long breath she'd been holding, while Maria managed a shaky smile. Sheriff Martinez stood, placing a hand on Thomas's shoulder. "They'll be back with more numbers next time." "I know," Thomas nodded. "That's what I'm counting on." He turned to the gathered veterans. "All right, let's talk strategy. Doc, I want you coordinating medical support. Sandman, start setting up observation posts. They'll try to study our patterns, so let's give them something to look at." As the veterans began organizing, Thomas felt a familiar energy building, the calm focus before an operation. Los Serpientes had made a critical error. They thought they were dealing with an old veteran and a few local defenders. Instead, they'd awakened a network of elite warriors who understood that some battles had to be fought not just for survival, but for the soul of a community. The morning sun climbed higher as more veterans arrived, each bringing unique skills and experience. Desert Winds was transforming from a simple truck stop into a fortress, but in ways that weren't immediately visible. Thomas knew the cartel would return with more force, more violence, but when they did, they'd find that targeting the wrong veteran had consequences they never could have imagined. The desert wind carried the scent of creosote and sage, and with it the promise of storms to come. But Thomas Reynolds was ready. He'd spent his life fighting cartels in the shadows. Now it was time to bring that fight into the light and show Los Serpientes what happens when they underestimate a community, united against them. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Desert Winds as Thomas sat with Sheriff Martinez and a growing group of veterans in the far corner of the diner. Sandman spread out a detailed topographical map of the surrounding area, marking known Los Serpientes sightings with red pins. "They've hit every major stop from Sonora up through Phoenix," Sandman explained, his finger tracing the pattern. "But this is different. They're not just expanding, they're establishing a new corridor." Doc Rodriguez leaned forward, adjusting his tactical glasses. "According to my contacts in Mexico, Los Serpientes are making a major power play. Their leader, Alejandro El Fantasma Ruiz, has united 3 smaller cartels under his banner. He's got at least 60 professional soldiers, former Mexican special forces, plus more recruits." "That explains their tactics," Thomas noted, studying the map. "They're not just moving drugs anymore. They're building infrastructure, establishing permanent routes. Each truck stop they control becomes part of a larger network." Sheriff Martinez pointed to their location. Desert Winds sits at the intersection of three major highways, perfect spot to control distribution across the entire Southwest. Maria approached with fresh coffee, her steps hesitant. "Senor Thomas, there's something you should know. 2 men have been watching the lot for the past hour. They're in a black pickup, but no markings like the others." Thomas exchanged looks with Martinez. "Reconnaissance. They're studying our patterns, trying to identify weaknesses." Sandman cracked his knuckles. "Let's go introduce ourselves." "No," Thomas said firmly. "Let them watch. Let them think they're gathering good intelligence." He turned to the others. "This isn't about one truck stop anymore. This is our chance to expose their entire operation. A trap," Martinez realized, straightening in her chair. "But we'll need more than just a few veterans and my deputies." Thomas nodded. "Already on it. I've got contacts in the DEA and FBI from my Delta Force days, but we need to play this smart. Let Los Serpientes think they're in control while we build our case." Doc Rodriguez pulled out his laptop, bringing up surveillance photos. "It gets worse. Look who's coming to oversee the operation personally." He turned the screen, showing a high-resolution image of a man in an expensive suit exiting a private jet. "El Fantasma himself," Thomas said grimly. "He never leaves Mexico, unless it's important. This territory must be crucial to his plans." Sarah joined them, setting down a fresh pot of coffee. "I don't understand. Why not just call in the authorities now?" "Because we need more than just a few cartel soldiers dealing drugs," Thomas explained. "This is our chance to take down their entire infrastructure. But first, we need them to commit their forces, expose their connections." The radio at Martinez's hip crackled. "Sheriff, got multiple vehicles approaching from the south. Looks like they're setting up observation posts." "Good," Thomas said quietly. "Let them think they're being clever. Meanwhile—" He pulled out his phone, showing a series of encrypted messages. "My old unit is positioning assets. When El Fantasma makes his move, we'll be ready." A young mechanic, Carlos Rivera, approached their table. "Maybe I can help. I served with the Army Corps of Engineers. Got some ideas about controlling access to the lot, creating choke points." Thomas gestured for him to join them. "We need everything, every skill, every pair of eyes. This isn't just about defending Desert Winds anymore. This is about taking down an organization that's terrorized communities on both sides of the border." As they talked, more people began drifting over. A retired high school teacher who'd served in military intelligence, a local farmer who'd been in Army Rangers, a young waitress whose brother was currently deployed overseas. Each brought something to the table: information, skills, resources. Sarah watched from behind the counter, amazed at how quickly her quiet truck stop had transformed into what looked like a military command center. She caught Thomas's eye and nodded, determination replacing her earlier fear. "Got something interesting," Doc called out, his fingers flying over his laptop keyboard. "Been monitoring their communications. El Fantasma's not just coming to oversee this operation. He's bringing a major shipment with him. Wants to demonstrate his power, show everyone that nothing can stop Los Serpientes." "That's what we need," Martinez said. "Catch him with the product. We can bring federal charges." Thomas stood, addressing the group. "Listen up. What's about to happen isn't just about one truck stop. Los Serpientes think they can terrorize communities, corrupt officials, turn honest businesses into fronts for their operation. They're about to learn differently." He moved to the window, watching the cartel's observation vehicles make another pass. Every call they make, every photo they take, every threat they deliver, it's all evidence. They think they're gathering intelligence on us. We're building a case against their entire organization. Sandman approached, his voice low. Just got word from my contacts. El Fantasma's bringing heavy hitters, former Mexican Special Forces commandos. These aren't street thugs, Ghost. These are professional killers. Good, Thomas replied. The more resources they commit, the more we can take down when this is over. Maria, who had been listening nearby, asked nervously, "But what about the danger? To all of us?" Thomas turned to address everyone. "I won't lie to you. This will get worse before it gets better. Los Serpientes will threaten, intimidate, try to break us down individually, but that's exactly why we have to stand together. Every community they've taken over, they won for one reason. People were too afraid to unite against them." Sheriff Martinez stood. "Not this time. This time they picked the wrong community. And definitely the wrong veteran," Sandman added with a grim smile. As evening approached, more community members arrived, each bringing something to contribute. Carlos and his crew began subtly modifying the parking lot, creating defensible positions that looked like ordinary improvements. Doc Rodriguez established a secure communication network, while Sandman's team set up hidden observation posts. Thomas watched it all unfold, his mind already several steps ahead. He'd spent years fighting cartels, learning their patterns, understanding their psychology. Los Serpientes thought they were dealing with a simple truck stop, but they were about to learn a hard lesson about underestimating their opponents. The desert sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lot. Through the windows, they could see more cartel vehicles arriving, establishing a perimeter of observation points. But for every watcher they posted, Thomas and his team had two of their own. "They're getting bolder," Martinez noted as another SUV drove past slowly. "Let them," Thomas replied. "Every move they make, every resource they commit, it's all part of the trap. They think they're surrounding us. We're letting them walk right into our kill box." Sarah approached with fresh coffee. "You really think we can beat something as powerful as a cartel?" Thomas turned to her, his expression serious. "Los Serpientes are about to learn something important. They're used to fighting other criminals, corrupt officials, people who can be bought or intimidated, but they've never faced a community of warriors united against them. You can't bribe honor. You can't intimidate people who've faced worse in combat. And you definitely can't break a community that refuses to be broken." As night fell over desert winds, the tension was palpable. Everyone knew that somewhere out there, El Fantasma was coming, bringing with him the full force of his cartel. But in the truck stop's back office, Thomas and his team continued planning, marking positions, coordinating with federal assets, and preparing for the battle to come. "Remember," Thomas told the gathered veterans, "this isn't just about defending one location. This is about showing every community terrorized by cartels that they can fight back. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't just defeating an enemy. It's showing others that the enemy can be defeated." The desert wind picked up, carrying the distant sound of thunder. A storm was coming to Desert Wind's truck stop, but not the kind that Los Serpientes expected. They thought they were about to crush a simple act of resistance. Instead, they were about to learn what happens when they target the wrong veteran in the wrong community at the wrong time. The first attack came just before midnight. Thomas watched through the diner's security cameras as 5 black SUVs and 3 armored pickups rolled into the Desert Winds parking lot, their headlights cutting through the desert darkness. But this wasn't the full assault. This was Los Serpientes, testing their defenses. "First wave incoming," Sandman's voice crackled over the encrypted radio. "Counting 15 tangos, all armed. Professional stance and movement, definitely former military." "Hold positions," Thomas ordered. "Let them make the first move. Everything has to be documented." Inside the diner, the few remaining customers had been quietly evacuated hours earlier. Sarah and Maria insisted on staying, monitoring the cameras from the reinforced back office. Doc Rodriguez and his team were stationed strategically throughout the building, while Sheriff Martinez's deputies maintained a discreet perimeter. Reyes emerged from the lead vehicle, his scarred face illuminated by the harsh parking lot lights. Gold-toothed Hector and several new cartel soldiers flanked him, all carrying military-grade weapons poorly concealed under their jackets. "Come, on out, Ghost," Reyes called, using Thomas's old call sign. "Time to finish what we started, or are you only brave when there are civilians to hide behind?" Thomas stood calmly in the center of the diner, watching through the windows. "Remember," he said quietly to his team, "let them escalate. Everything has to be clearly self-defense." The sound of breaking glass shattered the tension as rocks came through the windows. "This is what happens when you disrespect Los Serpientes," Hector shouted, leading several men in vandalizing the building. "Still holding?" Doc Rodriguez asked over the radio, his position covering the kitchen entrance. "Not yet," Thomas replied. "Wait for it." Reyes, growing frustrated by the lack of response, kicked in the front door. "What's wrong, old man? Not so tough without your veteran friends around?" Thomas stepped forward, his voice carrying easily across the room. "Last warning. Leave now, or this ends badly for all of you." Several cartel soldiers rushed forward, led by Hector. They made it 3 steps into the diner before the trap was sprung. Hidden lights blazed from concealed positions, temporarily blinding the attackers. The veterans moved with practiced precision, neutralizing threats before they could react. Doc Rodriguez and 2 others expertly disarmed Hector's immediate backup. Sandman, moving like a shadow, had 2 cartel soldiers face down before they could draw their weapons. The remaining attackers found themselves caught in a perfectly executed close-quarters takedown. Outside, police sirens wailed as Sheriff Martinez's deputies moved in, supported by state police units that had been strategically positioned. The cartel soldiers found themselves caught between the defenders inside and law enforcement outside. "Drop your weapons!" Martinez's voice boomed through a megaphone. "The building is surrounded." Some tried to run, only to find their vehicles mysteriously disabled. Carlos's team had done their work well. Others surrendered immediately, realizing they were hopelessly outmatched. Reyes, pinned under Sandman's knee, cursed in Spanish. "You don't know what you've started when El Fantasma gets here." "That's exactly what we're counting on," Thomas interrupted, holding up a phone that had been recording everything. Clear evidence of Los Serpientes' intentions, caught on multiple devices, all admissible in court. The fight was over in minutes, ending with most of the cartel soldiers in custody. The damage to Desert Winds was significant but controlled, exactly as Thomas had planned. "You set this up," Reyes realized as state troopers cuffed him. "Used us to get evidence." "You made it easy," Thomas replied. "People like you always react the same way, with force and threats. Predictable." As the arrested cartel soldiers were loaded into transport vehicles, Martinez joined Thomas inside. "That's twice we've caught them. They'll be even more desperate now." "Good," Thomas nodded, "because this was just the warm-up. The real target is still coming." The radio crackled with an urgent message from one of their lookouts. Multiple vehicles approaching from the south. High-end SUVs with armed escorts. "Right on schedule." Thomas moved to the window, watching the approaching convoy. El Fantasma wants to see the situation for himself. 4 black Escalades rolled past slowly, their windows tinted, but not enough to hide the occupants completely. In the second vehicle, a man in an expensive suit was just visible, studying the scene. Thomas recognized him immediately from intelligence briefings. Alejandro El Fantasma, Ruiz himself, one of Mexico's most wanted cartel leaders. "That's him," Thomas said quietly, "coming to inspect his damaged operation." The convoy didn't stop, but the message was clear. The real battle was about to begin. El Fantasma wasn't a common criminal like his soldiers. He was calculating, patient, and utterly ruthless. "What now?" Martinez asked as the SUVs disappeared into the night. "Now we wait. He'll want to re-establish control quickly, prove that no one can resist Los Serpientes. When he makes his move." Thomas smiled grimly. "We'll be ready." Inside the diner, the cleanup began. Windows were boarded up, glass swept away, evidence carefully preserved. But there was a new tension in the air. Everyone knew that El Fantasma's appearance meant the conflict was escalating beyond simple gang violence. "You've dealt with him before?" Sarah asked Thomas. "In Delta Force. We almost caught him 3 years ago during Operation Black Sand. He escaped, but we took down his entire operation in Sinaloa. He's rebuilt since then, stronger than ever." "Can we really stand up to someone like that?" Maria asked, her voice trembling slightly. Thomas placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We already are. Everything that's happened, the fights, the arrests, the property damage, it's all building a case not just against local cartel soldiers, but against El Fantasma's entire organization." The night grew quiet again, but no one relaxed. More cartel vehicles could be heard in the distance, circling, watching. Los Serpientes weren't finished, and now they had their leader's direct attention. "Get some rest," Thomas told the group. "Tomorrow we show them what happens when they bring a cartel war to our doorstep." As the others dispersed to their assigned positions, Thomas remained by the window, watching the desert darkness. He'd spent his career fighting cartels, but always in the shadows, always with official backing. This was different. This was a community standing up, refusing to be intimidated. El Fantasma thought he was dealing with the simple problem of local resistance. He was about to learn that he'd stumbled into a carefully laid trap, one that would use his own arrogance and aggression against him. The desert wind carried the scent of rain. A storm was coming. But Thomas Reynolds was ready. Sometimes the greatest victories don't come from superior firepower or better tactics. Sometimes they come from showing others that even the most powerful enemies can be defeated when a community stands together. Tomorrow would bring more violence, more threats, more attempts to break their will. But Los Serpientes were about to learn that they'd made a fatal mistake. They'd targeted not just the wrong veteran, but the wrong community at the wrong time. And that mistake was going to cost them everything. Dawn broke over Desert Wind's truck stop, revealing the full extent of last night's battle damage. Thomas sat with Sheriff Martinez and two DEA agents who'd arrived just after sunrise, reviewing intelligence on El Fantasma's operation. Our sources confirm he's moving beyond traditional drug routes, Agent Sofia Torres explained, spreading surveillance photos across the table. Los Serpientes aren't just trafficking anymore, they're building an empire. He's evolved, Thomas noted, studying a photo showing El Fantasma meeting with corrupt officials, using legitimate businesses, establishing political connections. This isn't just about controlling territory. No, Agent James Chen agreed, pointing to a complex network diagram. Conservative estimates put his operations value at over $2 billion annually. He's got judges, politicians, even rival cartels paying tribute. The meeting was interrupted by Sandman's urgent entry. Movement on the South Road. 3 black Suburbans, same ones from last night. Everyone moved to the window, watching the vehicles approach. This time they didn't just drive past. The convoy pulled into the lot, parking in a defensive formation. Men in tailored suits emerged, their bulges under their jackets clearly indicating high-end weapons. "Here we go," Thomas said quietly. "Remember, let them make the first move." El Fantasma stepped out last. In person, he cut an imposing figure. Tall, athletic, wearing a custom suit that probably cost more than most people made in a year. His face was handsome but cold, bearing the confident expression of someone used to absolute power. The cartel leader entered Desert Winds, flanked by 4 guards, surveying the damage from last night's attack with apparent amusement. His eyes found Thomas immediately. "Senor Reynolds," El Fantasma said smoothly, his English perfect with just a hint of accent. "Or should I say ghost? Your reputation precedes you. Operation Black Sand, wasn't it? You caused me quite an inconvenience in Sinaloa." Thomas stood calmly, positioning himself between El Fantasma and the others. "Wasn't personal, just doing my job." "And now?" El Fantasma spread his hands, indicating the damaged diner. "Is this your job too? Standing in the way of progress? If by progress you mean turning honest businesses into drug fronts, then yes." El Fantasma's smile didn't waver. "You Americans, always so. Binary, good and evil, right and wrong. The world isn't that simple, Ghost. I provide jobs, stability, protection. I build schools, hospitals. The people love me. The people fear you," Thomas corrected. "There's a difference. Fear, love. What matters is respect." El Fantasma's eyes hardened. "And you're showing a distinct lack of it." "Do you know what I do to people who disrespect me?" "I know exactly what you do," Thomas replied evenly. "I've seen your handiwork. The families you've destroyed, the communities you've corrupted. But that ends here." El Fantasma laughed, the sound utterly devoid of warmth. "Ends here? My friend, this is where it begins. Desert Winds is crucial to my expansion plans. Nothing will prevent that. Not you, not your veteran friends, not these federal agents trying to hide in plain sight." One of El Fantasma's guards moved forward, but the cartel leader held up a hand. "Please, let's be civilized. I'm prepared to be generous. $10 million. Cash, untraceable. Walk away, forget what you've seen. Not interested. 20 million then, plus monthly payments to ensure your continued retirement remains comfortable." Thomas didn't blink. "The answer's still no." El Fantasma's smile finally faded. "You know, I had my people look into you. Very impressive record. Delta Force, Joint Special Operations Command, CIA liaison. But what interested me most was what you did after retiring. He pulled out a phone, scrolling through photos, training local militias in Colombia, advising anti-cartel task forces in Mexico, always fighting the same battle over and over. Don't you ever get tired, Ghost? Some battles need fighting, Thomas replied. Some lines need defending. Everyone has a line they'll cross, El Fantasma said coldly. Everyone has something they value more than principles. Your friend Sarah's daughter at college in California, Maria's grandchildren in New Mexico, Sheriff Martinez's sister teaching school in Texas. Would be a shame if anything happened to them. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Thomas took a step forward, his voice deadly quiet. Threatening families. That's a line you don't want to cross. I cross whatever lines I choose, El Fantasma replied. I own this territory now. Local law enforcement, state police, even your precious federal agencies. I have people everywhere. You're fighting a losing battle. Maybe, Thomas agreed, but it's a battle I'm going to fight anyway. El Fantasma studied him for a long moment. You really don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? I'm not like the street thugs you fought in Colombia or the wannabe soldiers you chased in Mexico. I am the storm that's coming to this desert. Everything and everyone bends to my will, or they break. That's where you're wrong, Thomas said. You're not the storm. You're just another man who's forgotten that even the most powerful empires can fall. Philosophical to the end. El Fantasma smiled again, but his eyes were arctic. You have 24 hours to reconsider my offer. After that, he gestured to the damaged diner. This will seem like a pleasant memory. As the cartel leader turned to leave, Thomas called after him. You're not the first cartel boss I've taken down. Won't be the last. El Fantasma paused at the door. No, Ghost. I'm not like the others you faced. They were businessmen playing at being soldiers. I'm a soldier playing at being a businessman. Remember that. After the convoy departed, Agent Torres turned to Thomas. He wasn't bluffing about those threats. No, he wasn't. Get protective details on those families immediately. Already done, Chen replied. But he's right about having people everywhere. We can't trust normal channels. Thomas nodded grimly. Then we trust our people. Doc, get on the radio. Call in every veteran who can make it. Sandman, contact your friends in private security. We need eyes everywhere. People we know aren't on El Fantasma's payroll. What's he going to do? Maria asked, her voice shaking. First he'll isolate us, Thomas explained. Cut off supplies, communication, support. Then he'll start applying. Pressure, accidents, vandalism, anonymous threats. Finally, when he thinks we're weakened and scared, he'll hit us with everything he has. And we're going to let him? Sarah demanded. We're going to encourage him. Every step of his plan needs to look like it's working. He has to believe we're breaking down, turning against each other. That's when he'll get sloppy. Agent Chen frowned. That's a dangerous game, Ghost. These aren't just thugs. These are professional killers. I know exactly what they are, Thomas replied. That's why this has to end here. El Fantasma isn't just threatening us. He's threatening every community along his expansion route. If we don't stop him now, how many other families will he destroy? The rest of the day was spent preparing. Veterans arrived in a steady stream, each bringing skills and resources. Carlos and his crew installed hidden cameras and sensors. Doc Rodriguez established a secure communication network. The truck stop was transformed into a fortress, but in ways that weren't immediately visible. As night fell, more cartel vehicles appeared, circling the property with increasing boldness. They were just the visible threat. Everyone knew El Fantasma's professional killers were out there too, watching, waiting. 24 hours, Martinez mused, joining Thomas at his usual spot at the counter. Think we're ready? Thomas checked his phone, reading the latest updates from his network of contacts. We're ready. Question is, are they ready for what's coming? You really think this will work? Drawing them in, making them think they're winning? It has to work, Thomas replied, because if it doesn't... The night grew darker and the circling vehicles grew bolder. Everyone could feel it, the calm before the storm. El Fantasma had made his threat, set his deadline. Soon, very soon, all hell would break loose at Desert Wind's truck stop. But this time, Thomas and his allies weren't just defending a business. They were taking down a cartel empire, and every move had to be perfect. The desert wind picked up, carrying the promise of violence to come. But in that wind was something else, the unshakable determination of a community that had decided. Enough was enough. The pressure began mounting as soon as the sun rose. First came the whispered phone calls to Sarah's suppliers, sudden cancellations, mysterious delivery problems. By mid-morning, fuel trucks were being turned away at highway, checkpoints by police officers who just needed to verify some paperwork. Thomas watched it all unfold from his usual spot, noting each move in El Fantasma's campaign of isolation. Right on schedule, he muttered to Agent Torres. He's flexing his network, showing us how deep his influence runs. The radio crackled. With Sandman's voice, got cartel vehicles setting up at both highway exits. They're turning away trucks, telling them Desert Winds is closed for health violations. Martinez checked her phone. Just got word from county. Surprise health inspections on the way. Bet they find all kinds of problems. Of course they will, Thomas nodded. El Fantasma's thorough. He'll use every legal channel he can before. Resorting to violence makes it harder to prove criminal intent. Sarah emerged from her office, face pale. Bank just called. There's a problem with our business loan. They're threatening to call in the full amount by end of week. He's good, Agent Chen admitted, using legitimate pressure points, making it look like unrelated issues. Hard to prove coordination. Thomas stood, gathering everyone around. This is just phase 1. Next comes the personal pressure, anything to make us feel isolated and vulnerable. As if on cue, Maria's phone buzzed. She checked it, hands trembling. Someone sent pictures. They've been following my grandchildren at school. She showed similar surveillance photos of Sarah's daughter and Martinez's sister with a message, think about your loved ones before it's too late. Carlos rushed in from outside. Got incoming. Looks like they're making a statement. Through the windows, they watched as 3 black SUVs pulled up to the Desert Wind sign. Men in suits emerged, carrying cans of spray paint. In broad daylight, they began defacing the property, writing threats in both English and Spanish. Bold move, Martinez observed, doing it in plain sight. They want us to see it, Thomas explained. Want us to feel helpless. But notice what? They're not doing no actual violence yet. They're building pressure gradually, professionally. Doc Rodriguez entered with his laptop. Got something interesting from our surveillance. They're not just targeting us. They're hitting anyone connected to Desert Winds, local mechanics refusing to service their vehicles, suppliers suddenly cancelling contracts. They're trying to isolate us completely. Textbook psychological warfare. Thomas noted. I've seen cartels use these tactics before. Break down support networks, create a sense of inevitability, make people feel like resistance is futile. But something was different at Desert Winds. Instead of breaking under the pressure, the community was adapting. Local farmers began bringing supplies directly to the truck stop, bypassing traditional delivery routes. Retired mechanics offered their services. Families whose loved ones had been threatened by cartels in the past started coming forward, offering support. They don't understand what they're dealing with, Sandman said, cleaning his rifle scope. They think this is like Mexico or Colombia, where they can isolate and intimidate communities, but they've never faced a community of warriors before. Thomas's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. He read it, then showed it to Agent Torres. My contact in Mexico just confirmed El Fantasma's bringing in his elite enforcement unit, former Mexican special forces, trained by Israeli contractors. They're the ones he uses for high-priority targets. How many? Martinez asked. 20 operators plus support personnel. These aren't ordinary cartel soldiers. They're legitimate Tier 1 operators who switched sides for money. Sarah overheard this and approached. Can we really stand against professional soldiers like that? Thomas smiled grimly. They're good, but they're fighting for a paycheck. We're fighting for something more important. Our community, our families, our way of life. And we've got something they don't expect. He led them to the back office, where dozens of monitors showed feeds from hidden cameras. While they've been trying to intimidate us, we've been gathering intelligence. Every threat, every act of vandalism, every corrupt official they've exposed, it's all documented. But more importantly, he pointed to a series of thermal imaging feeds showing the desert around Desert Winds. Scattered among the rocks and cacti were dozens of hidden positions, veterans who'd been quietly deploying for days. They think we're just defending the truck stop, Thomas explained. They don't realize we're building a kill zone. When El Fantasma commits his forces, they'll be walking into a trap months in the making. Agent Chen studied the tactical displays. You're not just trying to stop a cartel attack, you're going to take down his entire operation. Exactly. El Fantasma's too careful to expose himself normally, but his ego won't let him back down from this challenge. He'll come personally to oversee the operation. That's when we spring the trap. Martinez's radio crackled. One of her deputies reported more cartel vehicles arriving at the county line, expensive SUVs with diplomatic plates. His command elements moving into position, Thomas noted. They'll establish a forward operating base, probably at one of the abandoned ranches nearby. Standard cartel tactical procedure. As if to emphasize the escalating situation, every phone in the room buzzed simultaneously. Each screen showed the same message, a final warning from El Fantasma himself, along with more surveillance photos of loved ones going about their daily routines. Getting sloppy, Thomas observed. He's letting his ego override his tactical judgment. The old El Fantasma would never commit so many resources to one operation. Because he thinks he can't lose, Torres added. His whole reputation is built on never backing down, never showing weakness. And that's exactly why he's going to fall, Thomas replied. He's so focused on winning this battle, he doesn't realize he's already lost the war. Outside, the desert sun beat down mercilessly as more cartel vehicles arrived. They were establishing a perimeter, cutting off access roads, positioning sniper teams on distant ridges. To anyone else, it would look like an overwhelming force preparing to crush a small pocket of resistance. But Thomas saw something different. He saw arrogance leading to tactical mistakes. He saw an opponent so confident in his power that he couldn't conceive of defeat. Most importantly, he saw a community united against a common enemy, ready to show the world that even the most powerful cartels could be defeated. "You know what's really going to destroy them?" he asked the gathered group. "Not just the arrests or the evidence we're gathering. It's going to be the story that comes out of this. Every community they've terrorized, every business they've extorted, they're all going to see that cartels aren't invincible, that when people stand together, even the most powerful criminals can fall." As evening approached, the pressure continued. Mounting, more vehicles arrived hourly, their headlights creating a ring of fire around desert winds. The message was clear. There was no escape, no hope of resistance. But in the back office, Thomas was setting his own plans in motion. His phone buzzed constantly with updates from his network of veterans and intelligence contacts. Every move El Fantasma made was being documented, every threat recorded, every corrupt official exposed. 6 hours to his deadline, Martinez noted as midnight approached. "He won't wait that long," Thomas replied. "All this pressure, it's building to something. He wants us scared, desperate." Then, before he could finish, every phone in the room buzzed one final time. The message was clear: take the money and run, or face the consequences. Images showed cartel soldiers positioned near loved ones across 3 states, ready to strike. "Right on schedule," Thomas said quietly. "Final warning before the hammer falls." "What do we do?" Maria asked, staring at photos of her grandchildren. Thomas stood, addressing everyone. "We do exactly what El Fantasma expects. We look scared, we act desperate. We make him think his plan is working perfectly, and then, Sarah pressed, "and then we spring the trap we've been setting since this whole thing began. El Fantasma thinks he's breaking us. What he doesn't realize is that every move he's made, every threat, every bribe, it's all evidence. When this is over, he won't just lose a truck stop, he'll lose everything." The night grew darker as the deadline approached. Inside Desert Winds, a community stood together, watching the forces gathering against them. Outside, an army of cartel soldiers circled like wolves, waiting for the order to attack. The final confrontation was coming. The only question was who would be truly ready when it arrived. But Thomas Reynolds knew something El Fantasma didn't. Sometimes the greatest weapon isn't firepower or fear. Sometimes it's the unshakable courage of ordinary people who've decided that enough is enough. The desert wind carried the scent of coming violence, but in that wind was something else. The strength of a community that had found its voice, its courage, and its moment to stand against the darkness that had terrorized too many for too long. 2 hours before El Fantasma's deadline, the power went out at Desert Winds. Emergency generators kicked in instantly. Thomas had prepared for this, casting the truck stop in an eerie red glow. Outside, the circle of cartel vehicles tightened, their headlights creating a wall of illumination that made the darkness beyond seem even deeper. "First move," Thomas said, checking his watch. "Classic psychological warfare. Make us feel trapped, isolated in the dark." Through their thermal imaging feeds, they watched as teams of cartel operators began moving into position. These weren't ordinary soldiers. Their movement patterns showed advanced tactical training. El Fantasma's elite unit is deploying, Sandman reported through the secure radio. I count 4-man teams setting up interlocking fields of fire. These guys know what they're doing. So do we, Thomas replied. He turned to the gathered defenders. Remember your training. Don't engage unless directly threatened. Let them think their intimidation is working. A new convoy of vehicles approached from the south. 3 armored SUVs flanked by motorcycle escorts. Even from a distance, the level of professional security was obvious. El Fantasma's personal security detail, Agent Torres identified. Same configuration he used in Sinaloa. He's coming to oversee the operation himself. The cartel leader emerged from the center vehicle, still immaculate in his tailored suit, despite the desert heat. His security team moved with practiced efficiency, establishing a perimeter while maintaining clear lines of fire. "Last chance, Ghost," El Fantasma called out. His voice carried easily across the parking lot. "I'm even willing to double my offer, given how entertaining this has been. $40 million, enough to disappear anywhere in the world." Thomas met him at the entrance, standing calmly in the doorway. "You still don't understand what this is about, do you? It was never about money. It's always about money." El Fantasma smiled coldly. "Money, power, control, different words for the same thing. Look around you, Ghost. I have hundreds of men deployed. Every escape route is covered. Even if, by some miracle, you survive what's coming, I have teams ready to move against every person you care about in 3 states. "I know," Thomas replied. "You've been very thorough in showing us your capabilities, very public with your threats, almost like you wanted to prove something." Something in Thomas's tone made El Fantasma pause. He studied the former Delta operator more carefully. "You're planning something. I'm just standing here having a conversation." "No." El Fantasma's eyes narrowed. "This whole thing, the resistance, the gradual breakdown, the appearance of desperation. You've been playing us." Thomas smiled slightly. "Took you long enough to figure it out. You're slipping, Alejandro. The old you would have seen the trap sooner." The cartel leader's composure cracked for just a moment. "What trap? I have overwhelming force. I have your loved ones under surveillance. I have corrupt officials ready to bury any investigation. What could you possibly—" He stopped as the sound of helicopter rotors thundered overhead. Suddenly, powerful spotlights blazed from hidden positions around the truck stop, illuminating the entire perimeter. El Fantasma's security team moved to protect him, but found laser sights already painting their chests. "You have something I want," Thomas said calmly. "You just don't know it yet." "The shipment," El Fantasma realized. "You knew I'd bring it personally, that I'd want to demonstrate my power by moving product even while conducting this operation. 2 tons of pure cocaine plus weapons plus proof of corruption at every level of law enforcement and government, all brought together in one place because your ego wouldn't let you back down from a challenge. Federal tactical teams appeared from concealed positions, their movements coordinated and precise. Every cartel observation post, every sniper position, every escape route, all were covered by veterans who'd been waiting patiently for this moment." "Impossible," El Fantasma snarled. "I own this territory. I own the police, the politicians." "You own some of them," Thomas corrected. "But you'd be amazed how many honest officials were just waiting for a chance to bring you down. All they needed was evidence they could trust, and an operation they knew wasn't compromised. Agent Torres stepped forward, badge displayed. Everything you've done in the past week has been documented. Every threat, every bribe, every corrupt official you exposed trying to pressure us. You didn't just bring your drugs here. You brought us an ironclad RICO case against your entire organization. El Fantasma's face twisted with rage. Kill them, he screamed. Kill them all. But as his men moved to attack, the true nature of the trap became clear. Veterans who'd been hiding in plain sight as truckers and customers revealed themselves, all armed and ready. Every window of the truck stop concealed a defensive position. Every approach was covered by interlocking fields of fire. You forgot the first rule of special operations, Thomas said, as federal agents moved to take El Fantasma into custody. Never let the enemy choose the battlefield. We've been preparing this ground for months, just waiting for the right target to walk into it. The battle was brief but intense. A few cartel soldiers tried to fight, but found themselves caught in carefully prepared kill zones. Most surrendered once they realized the hopelessness of their position. Impossible, El Fantasma muttered as he was led away in handcuffs. I had every angle covered, every contingency planned. Except one, Thomas replied. You forgot that some things are worth fighting for. Some communities won't be broken, no matter how much pressure you apply. Dawn was breaking as the last arrests were made. Federal agents processed dozens of cartel soldiers, while evidence teams catalogued the massive shipment of drugs and weapons El Fantasma had brought with him. It's over? Maria asked, watching from the doorway. This part is, Thomas nodded, but the real work is just beginning. El Fantasma's arrest exposes corruption at every level. It's going to take time to clean it all up. Sarah surveyed the damage to her truck stop. The windows were shot out, the walls scarred by bullets, but the structure stood strong, like its defenders. Was it worth it? She asked quietly. Thomas looked around at the community that had stood together. The veterans who'd risked everything, the civilians who'd refused to be intimidated, the honest officials who'd finally found their chance to fight back. Ask them, he said, gesturing to the federal agents who were already using El Fantasma's seized phones to coordinate raids across 3 states. Ask every community that won't have to live under cartel control now. Some fights choose you. The only question is whether you're willing to stand and face them. The rising sun cast long shadows across the parking lot where federal agents were dismantling the last vestiges of El Fantasma's operation. A new day was dawning at Desert Wind's truck stop, a day without threats, without fear. All because a cartel had targeted the wrong veteran at the wrong truck stop at the wrong time. But more importantly, because a community had decided that enough was enough, and that together they could defeat even the most powerful enemies. The desert wind carried away the last traces of gunsmoke, replacing it with the scent of sage and creosote. There would be more battles to come, more enemies to face, but now everyone knew that even the mightiest cartels could fall when faced with the unshakable courage of ordinary people who refused to be broken. In Sheriff Martinez's office, Thomas studied the evidence board they'd assembled in the days following El Fantasma's arrest. Photos of captured cartel operators covered one section, while a map showing discovered drug routes dominated another. Agent Torres was updating the board with information from ongoing raids. El Fantasma's not talking, Martinez said, entering, with fresh coffee from Desert Winds. but his lieutenants are singing like canaries. Amazing what a few hours in federal custody will do to cartel loyalty. What are they giving us? Thomas accepted the coffee, noting how the sheriff looked more energized despite the exhausting week. Names, dates, locations, Torres replied. The whole network is unraveling. Turns out Los Serpientes were just one piece of a larger operation. They had connections to criminal organizations in 12 countries. Makes sense, Thomas nodded. El Fantasma was always ambitious. He wasn't content just running drugs. He wanted to build a legitimate empire to hide his criminal one. Deputy Wilson entered with new intelligence summaries. You won't believe what we just found in his encrypted files. He wasn't just planning to control drug routes, he was setting up a complete shadow transportation network. Using truck stops as fronts, he had plans to move everything from weapons to human trafficking victims. How deep does this go? Martinez wondered, examining the growing evidence wall. All the way to the top, Agent Chen said, joining them with a thick folder. We've already arrested 3 state judges, 2 federal prosecutors, and a dozen high-ranking law enforcement officials. El Fantasma had people everywhere. Thomas's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. He read it, then looked up grimly. Just heard from my contact in Mexico. The remnants of Los Serpientes are already fracturing. Without El Fantasma's iron control, old rivalries are resurfacing. There's going to be a war for control of his territory. Good, Torres said. Let them fight each other. Makes it easier to identify and eliminate the remaining players. Sarah arrived with more coffee and news from Desert Winds. The truck stop was already becoming a symbol of resistance against cartel influence. Other business owners were coming forward, sharing their own stories of intimidation and extortion. It's not just about taking down one cartel anymore, Thomas explained. What happened at Desert Winds showed people something important, that even the most powerful criminal organizations can be defeated when communities stand together. Speaking of standing together, Martinez said, you should see what's happening out there. Through the office windows, they could see a gathering in the courthouse square. Local business owners, families, veterans, people from all walks of life coming together to share their stories and plan for a future free from cartel influence. This is what El Fantasma never understood, Thomas observed. He thought power came from fear and money, but real power comes from community, from people deciding that enough is enough. Carlos entered with architectural plans. We're not just rebuilding Desert Winds, we're making it better. Every repair, every improvement is designed to send a message. We're not afraid anymore. The radio crackled with updates from ongoing operations. Federal teams were discovering more of El Fantasma's network every hour. Safe houses, storage, facilities, front businesses, all were being exposed and shut down. Got something interesting, Doc Rodriguez called out, working at his laptop. Been analyzing El Fantasma's financial records. He wasn't just using truck stops for drug distribution. He was laundering money through them, billions of dollars, all hidden in plain sight. Classic cartel strategy, Thomas nodded. Use legitimate businesses to clean dirty money, then reinvest it in more legitimate holdings, build the empire one layer at a time, and now it's all coming down, Torres added with satisfaction. Every business, every account, every connection, we're not just taking his freedom, we're taking his legacy. The day continued as more evidence emerged. More arrests were made, and more details of El Fantasma's operation came to light. What had started as a local stand against intimidation had exposed a criminal network that spanned continents. Maria, watching the endless stream of federal activity, shook her head in amazement. Hard to believe it all started because they thought they could push around a veteran at a truck stop. That's usually how empires fall, Thomas replied. Someone gets too confident, picks the wrong fight, and everything they built comes crashing down. Through the windows, they could see more federal vehicles arriving as the investigation expanded. But there was something else, too. Community members coming forward, offering support, sharing information. The wall of silence that had protected the cartels for so long was crumbling. "You created something special here," Torres told Thomas. "Not just taking down criminals, but showing people how to prevent them from gaining power in the first place." Thomas watched the gathered crowd, seeing how the community had transformed. Fear had been replaced by determination, isolation by unity. Desert Winds was more than just a business now. It was a symbol of what could happen when people refused. To be intimidated, that's the real victory, he said. Not just defeating one organization, but changing how people think about fighting back. Sarah surveyed the busy sheriff's office, now a hub of anti-cartel operations. "Think we'll ever have trouble like that again?" "Someone will always try," Thomas answered. "But now we know how to handle it. More importantly, so does everyone else." As the sun began to set over the desert, the work continued. Veterans shared tactics with law enforcement, federal agents coordinated with local officials, and community members came together to plan for a future they could now believe in. The cartels were on notice. What happened at Desert Winds wasn't just a single defeat, it was a template for resistance. A message that even the most powerful criminals could fall when faced with a united community. And at the center of it, all was a simple truth. Sometimes the greatest victories don't come from superior firepower or better tactics. Sometimes they come from ordinary people finding their courage, standing together, and refusing to be broken. The desert wind carried away the last traces of fear, replacing it with something stronger, hope. Hope that what happened at Desert Winds could happen anywhere. Hope that communities could reclaim their streets, their businesses, their future. All because a cartel had made the mistake of targeting not just the wrong veteran, but the wrong community at the wrong time. And that mistake had started a movement that would echo far beyond one truck stop in the Arizona desert. Thomas Reynolds watched it all unfold, knowing that this was just the beginning. The battle at Desert Winds was over, but the war against cartel influence would continue. The difference was, now everyone knew it was a war that could be won. The sun set on another day in the desert, but its light had illuminated something powerful, the unshakable strength of a community united against evil. And that light would continue to shine, inspiring others to stand up, speak out, and fight back against those who would rule through fear and violence. 1 month after El Fantasma's arrest, Desert Winds truck stop hosted a community gathering unlike anything the small desert town had ever seen. The parking lot was filled with a mix of trucks, law enforcement vehicles, and local families celebrating their victory over organized crime. Thomas watched from his usual spot as Sarah and Maria served coffee to a unique blend of truckers, federal agents, and community members. The truck stop had been fully repaired, but they'd kept one bullet-scarred wall as a reminder of what they'd overcome. Final briefing from Washington. Agent Torres said, joining him with an official report. El Fantasma took a plea deal. Full cooperation against rival cartels, forfeiture of all assets. His testimony has already led to arrests in 7 countries. "How's he taking it?" Thomas asked, though he already knew the answer. "Not well," Torres smiled. The great El Fantasma, reduced to living in witness protection. His empire's gone, his reputation destroyed. The mighty cartel leader who ruled through fear, now afraid of his own shadow. Martinez approached with new files. "Got the final numbers on asset seizure? After federal processing, there's enough. Money to establish permanent anti-cartel task forces in 3 states, plus compensation for every business and person Los Serpientes harmed." Outside, Sandman's voice came through the radio one last time. "Got more visitors coming in. Looks like business owners from all over the Southwest. Here for the coalition meeting." "The Protection Coalition," Torres explained. "They're establishing new security protocols, sharing information to prevent another cartel from gaining a foothold. Your little truck stop started a movement, Ghost." Thomas watched as more vehicles arrived. Shop owners who'd once lived in fear of cartels were now organizing, working together to protect their communities. The transformation was remarkable. "Got something interesting," Doc Rodriguez called out, his laptop displaying intelligence summaries. "El Fantasma's testimony exposed cartel operations we didn't even know existed, major drug routes through quiet communities, corruption at every level of government. This is going to disrupt their activities for years." But the real story wasn't in the official reports or intelligence summaries. It was in the faces of the people gathering at Desert Winds. Families who no longer lived in fear. Business owners who could operate without paying protection money. Communities that had found their voice and their courage. Carlos, who'd helped fortify the truck stop, was now teaching other businesses how to protect themselves. "It's not just about physical security," he explained to a group of shop owners. "It's about creating a network, supporting each other, making it impossible for criminals to isolate and intimidate us." Sarah watched the gathering with pride. "Remember when this all started? When those first cartel soldiers walked in, thinking they could just take over?" "They made a common mistake," Thomas replied. "Thought fear was power. Never understood that real strength comes from unity, from people standing together against intimidation." Martinez's radio buzzed with updates from across the region. More communities were organizing, inspired by what happened at Desert Winds. The cartels' traditional tactics of isolation and intimidation were failing as people learned to work together. "Got the final report on the corrupt officials," Torres said, reviewing her files. "Every one of them is cooperating, trying to earn leniency. The whole network of corruption is exposed and being rebuilt properly." But perhaps the most significant change was in the community itself. Where once there had been silence and fear, now there was open resistance to criminal influence. People were sharing information, reporting suspicious activity, refusing to be intimidated. "You know what really destroyed them?" Thomas asked the gathered group. "Not just the arrests or the seized assets. It was showing others they could fight back. Every community they terrorized, every business they extorted, they're all standing up now." Maria brought fresh coffee, her hands steady now where they once trembled. "Will they try again? Other cartels?" "They'll try," Thomas nodded, "but now we know how to stop them. More importantly, so does everyone else." The desert sun climbed higher as more people arrived at the gathering. Former victims of cartel intimidation came to share their stories. Other business owners sought advice on protecting their communities. Law enforcement officials wanted to learn from Desert Wind's example. "Got something remarkable here," Doc Rodriguez called out from his laptop. "Reports coming in from Mexico. Other communities are following our model. Small towns are organizing, sharing information, refusing to let cartels establish footholds." "That's what they never understood," Thomas said. "You can't build an empire on fear forever. Eventually people find their courage and empires fall." The gathering continued throughout the day, but it was more than just a celebration. It was a statement, a declaration that communities would no longer live under cartel control. The methods that had worked at Desert Winds were being adapted and shared, creating a network of resistance that spanned states and borders. "You did more than take down a cartel," Torres told Thomas. "You created a template for fighting back, a way for ordinary people to stand up to extraordinary evil." But Thomas knew the credit belonged to everyone who'd stood together during those crucial days. The veterans who'd brought their skills and courage, the community members who'd refused to be intimidated, the honest officials who'd risked everything to fight corruption. As evening approached, the gathering showed no signs of slowing. People were sharing stories, making connections, building the networks that would help protect their communities. The fear that had once silenced them was gone, replaced by determination and hope. "Remember how it started?" Martinez mused. "Just another quiet night at a truck stop." "That's often how change begins," Thomas replied. "Not with grand plans or major operations, but with ordinary people deciding that enough is enough." The desert wind carried the scent of sage and victory, and with it the promise of a new beginning. What happened at Desert Winds wasn't just about defeating one cartel. It was about showing others that resistance was possible, that communities could stand together and win. As the sun set over the Arizona desert, casting long shadows across the gathered crowd, Thomas Reynolds knew that this was just the beginning. The battle at Desert Winds was over, but its impact would continue to spread, inspiring others to stand up, speak out, and fight back against those who would rule through fear. The cartels had learned a hard lesson. Sometimes the biggest mistake isn't picking a fight with the wrong veteran, but with the wrong community at the wrong time. And that mistake would continue to cost them everything, one awakened community at a time. 3 months after El Fantasma's arrest, Desert Wind's truck stop had become more than just a symbol of resistance. It was now a training center for communities fighting back against cartel influence. Thomas stood at his familiar spot, watching, as a new group of business owners and community leaders arrived for what they'd started calling freedom workshops. "Today's group came all the way from Texas," Agent Torres said, joining him with fresh intelligence reports. "Word spreading about what happened here. People want to learn how to protect their communities." The parking lot was filled with vehicles from across the Southwest, shop owners, local officials, and concerned citizens, all seeking to understand how one truck stop had managed to bring down a cartel empire. "Got something interesting," Doc Rodriguez called out, his laptop displaying satellite imagery. "Remember those drug routes El Fantasma controlled? They're all shutting down. Communities along the routes are organizing, sharing information, making it impossible for cartels to operate openly." Carlos, now head of security training, was leading a group through the renovated truck stop. See how we modified the layout? It's not about turning your business into a fortress. It's about creating smart security that serves your community while making it harder for criminals to gain control. Sarah had transformed part of the diner into a briefing room, where Martinez was explaining how law enforcement and communities could work together effectively. The key is trust, the sheriff emphasized. When people believe they can report suspicious activity without fear, cartels lose their greatest weapon: silence. Thomas's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from his contacts in Mexico. "More good news," he announced. 3 more cartel leaders have surrendered in the past week. They're seeing what happened to El Fantasma and realizing their old tactics don't work anymore. "It's not just about physical resistance," Torres added, addressing the gathered group. "It's about changing the entire dynamic. When communities stand together, when they refuse to be isolated and intimidated, the cartels lose their power." A young woman named Isabella, whose family had lost their restaurant to cartel extortion in California, spoke up. "But how do we start? The cartels seem so powerful, so untouchable." Thomas moved to the center of the room. "That's exactly what they want you to think. But let me tell you what they don't want you to know. Their power is built on an illusion. They want you to believe they're invincible, that resistance is futile. But what happened here at Desert Winds proved otherwise." He gestured to the bullet-scarred wall they'd preserved. "Those marks aren't just battle damage. They're a reminder that even the most powerful criminals can be defeated when people stand together. El Fantasma had everything: money, weapons, corrupt officials, professional soldiers. But he didn't have what we had, a community united against him." Martinez joined in. "Remember, cartels don't just want your money or your business. They want your fear, your submission. The moment you refuse to be afraid, the moment you start working together instead of staying isolated, that's when they start to lose." Sandman, who'd been quietly observing, added his perspective. "In special operations, we learned that the strongest defense isn't weapons or tactics, it's unity. When everyone works together, shares information, supports each other, that's what makes an operation successful." The workshop continued as they shared practical strategies: how to create community warning systems, how to document threats and build legal cases, how to support each other when the pressure comes. "The cartels haven't given up," Thomas warned. "They're adapting, trying to find new ways to operate. But so are we. Every community that stands up, every business that refuses to pay protection, money, every person who chooses courage over fear, they're all part of something bigger now." Maria, serving coffee to the participants, shared her own transformation. "I used to be so afraid," she admitted. "When they threatened my grandchildren, I thought about giving up. But then I saw how everyone stood together, how we supported each other. That's when I realized we're stronger than their threats." Limed. As the afternoon progressed, more success stories emerged. A group of truck stop owners from New Mexico described how they'd worked together to drive cartels from their roots. Shop owners from Arizona shared techniques for protecting their businesses without becoming fortresses. "You know what really frightens the cartels?" Torres asked the group. "Not just law enforcement or military action. What terrifies them is exactly what's happening in this room right now. People learning, sharing, organizing, because they know that once communities stop being afraid, their whole power structure crumbles." Thomas moved to the window, watching as more vehicles arrived. "Look out there," he said to the gathered leaders. Every person coming here represents a community ready to stand up. Every story shared, every lesson learned, it's all part of building something the cartels can't defeat. Carlos demonstrated the security systems they'd developed, simple but effective measures any business could implement. It's not about outgunning them, he explained. It's about making their old tactics useless. When they can't isolate you, when they can't intimidate you individually, that's when they fail. As evening approached, the participants gathered for a final session. Thomas stood before them, his presence commanding attention without effort. What happened here at Desert Winds wasn't just about one veteran standing up to a cartel. It was about a community discovering its strength, its courage, its power to resist. He continued, his voice carrying the weight of experience. The cartels want you to believe you're alone, that resistance is hopeless. But look around this room. Every person here represents hundreds more back home. You're not alone anymore. You're part of something bigger, a movement that's growing stronger every day. Martinez added her perspective. 3 months ago, we were just another small town living in fear of cartel expansion. Now, we're teaching others how to fight. That's how change happens, one community at a time, one victory at a time. As the workshop concluded, the participants didn't just leave with practical knowledge. They left with hope. Hope that their communities could stand up to cartels. Hope that the cycle of intimidation and fear could be broken. You know what we really accomplished here? Thomas asked Torres as they watched the vehicles depart. We didn't just show them how to fight back. We showed them they're not alone. That's what's going to destroy the cartels in the end. Not bullets or arrests, but communities standing together. The desert sun set over Desert Winds truck stop, but its light had illuminated something powerful. The unbreakable spirit of people who decided to fight back. What started as one veteran's stand against cartel intimidation had grown into a movement that was changing the face of communities across the Southwest. And somewhere in a federal detention center, El Fantasma might have finally understood his greatest mistake. He hadn't just picked a fight with the wrong veteran. He'd awakened a force that would continue to grow, continue to fight, continue to inspire long after his empire had crumbled to dust. The Desert Wind carried the promise of more victories to come. More communities finding their courage, more people choosing to stand together against those who would rule through fear. The battle that began at Desert Winds was far from over. It was just beginning to spread its light across the darkness of cartel control. 6 months after the fall of Los Serpientes, Thomas Reynolds stood at the podium of a national law enforcement conference, addressing a packed auditorium of federal agents, local police, and community leaders. Desert Winds had become more than just a success story. It had revolutionized how communities fought back against organized crime. The old playbook doesn't work anymore, Thomas explained, gesturing to the data displayed behind him. Cartels rely on isolation, intimidation, and the illusion of invincibility. But what happened at Desert Winds proved something crucial. When communities unite, when people refuse to be silent, that illusion shatters. Agent Torres, now heading the newly formed Community Defense Task Force, presented the statistics. In the 6 months since El Fantasma's arrest, we've seen a 70% decrease in cartel activity across the Southwest, not because of increased law enforcement alone, but because communities are working together, sharing information, standing united against intimidation. The conference center's main hall was filled with success stories. A shopkeeper from Texas, described how her entire neighborhood had organized against cartel extortion. A trucking association explained their new alert system that made it impossible for cartels to control transport routes. But the most significant change, Martinez added, joining them at the podium, isn't in the statistics. It's in the mindset. People aren't afraid anymore. They've seen that even the most powerful criminal organizations can fall when communities stand together. Doc Rodriguez presented his analysis of the changing patterns. Cartels are struggling to adapt. Their traditional tactics, threats, violence, corruption, they don't work when communities are united. They can't isolate people who refuse to be divided. The afternoon sessions focused on practical applications. Carlos, whose security innovations had been adopted across 3 states, demonstrated how simple modifications could make businesses resilient against criminal takeover. It's not about turning every shop into a fortress, he explained. It's about creating networks, support systems, making it impossible for cartels to establish control through fear. Sarah shared Desert Wind's transformation from a vulnerable truck stop to a symbol of resistance. The physical changes were important, she noted, but the real transformation was in our community. We learned that together we're stronger than any threat. Thomas moved through the conference, listening to stories of communities finding their courage. A small town in New Mexico that had driven out cartel influences. A neighborhood in Arizona that had exposed corrupt officials. Each victory building on the lessons learned at Desert Winds. You know what really terrifies the cartels now? Torres asked during a strategy session. Not our weapons or tactics. What terrifies them is seeing communities wake up, stand together, refuse to be controlled. Their whole power structure depends on people being too afraid to unite. The conference's impact reached beyond law enforcement. Community leaders learned how to organize effective resistance. Business owners shared strategies for protecting their livelihoods. Local officials discovered ways to build trust and cooperation with their communities. This is how we win, Thomas emphasized in his closing remarks. Not just through force or arrests, but by changing the entire dynamic. When communities stop being victims and start being warriors, cartels lose their power. Martinez presented updates from her jurisdiction. Since Desert Winds, not a single business had paid protection money. Crime rates had plummeted. The community's transformation had inspired others across the region. Remember, she told the gathered leaders, what happened at our truck stop wasn't just about one battle or one victory. It was about showing others that resistance is possible, that unity is stronger than fear. Late in the day, Thomas received news that validated everything they'd been teaching. 3 more cartel operations had surrendered in Mexico, citing the impossibility of maintaining control in areas where communities had adopted the Desert Winds model. They're learning, Torres noted with satisfaction. The old methods don't work anymore. Communities are watching, organizing, standing together, every threat exposed, every corrupt official revealed, every act of intimidation documented and shared. As the conference concluded, the participants didn't just leave with new strategies, they left with renewed purpose. The battle that began at Desert Winds had grown into a movement that was changing the face of communities across the nation. You've started something extraordinary, a federal director told Thomas. Communities aren't just fighting back. They're transforming how we think about security, about resistance, about power. Sarah, who'd been quietly observing the conference's impact, approached Thomas. "Remember that night when the cartel first walked into Desert Winds? Did you ever imagine it would lead to all this?" Thomas smiled, watching the diverse group of leaders sharing stories and strategies. What happened at Desert Winds was never just about one truck stop or one community. It was about showing others what's possible when people refuse to be intimidated. The conference's final session focused on the future. New community defense networks were being established. Training programs were being developed. The lessons learned at Desert Winds were being refined and adapted for different situations. "But remember," Thomas cautioned in his final address, "the cartels aren't giving up. They're adapting, looking for new ways to operate. Our strength isn't in any single tactic or strategy. It's in our unity, our refusal to be divided, our commitment to standing together." Dean, as the participants departed, carrying the spirit of Desert Winds back to their communities, Thomas reflected on the transformation he'd witnessed. What began as one veteran's stand against cartel intimidation had evolved into a nationwide movement of resistance and hope. The conference center emptied, but its impact would continue to ripple outward. Every community represented, every leader inspired, every strategy shared, all part of building something the cartels couldn't defeat, the unbreakable spirit of people who decided to fight back. And somewhere in his maximum security cell, El Fantasma might have finally understood the true magnitude of his mistake. He hadn't just lost a battle at Desert Winds, he'd awakened a force that would continue to grow, continue to inspire, continue to fight long after his empire had crumbled to dust. The evening sun cast long shadows across the conference center's parking lot, but its light had illuminated something powerful. The transformation that's possible when communities discover their strength, their courage, their power to resist. The battle that began at Desert Winds hadn't ended. It had only just begun to spread its light across the darkness of organized crime. Thomas's phone buzzed with messages from communities across the country, each sharing their own victories, their own stories of standing together against intimidation. The movement that started at a small desert truck stop was growing stronger every day, proving that the greatest power isn't in weapons or wealth, but in the unshakable unity of people who refuse to live in fear. 1 year after Los Serpientes targeted Desert Winds truck stop, Thomas Reynolds sat at his familiar spot at the counter, watching the sunrise paint the Arizona sky in shades of gold. The truck stop had become more than just a business or even a symbol. It was now a beacon of hope for communities across the nation. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Sarah said, bringing his usual coffee. The diner had been completely renovated, but they'd preserved that one bullet-scarred wall as a reminder, not of fear or violence, but of what people could achieve when they stood together. Agent Torres arrived early, carrying fresh intelligence reports. "You need to see this," she said, spreading photos across the counter. "Remember those cartel routes El Fantasma controlled? They're not just shut down, they've been transformed. Communities have turned them into networks of cooperation, sharing information, supporting each other." The morning crowd began filtering in, a mix of truckers, local residents and visitors who'd come to see where it all started. Desert Winds had become a pilgrimage site of sorts for those fighting against organized crime. "Got something remarkable," Doc Rodriguez called out from his usual table, laptop open. "Just finished analyzing the national data." Cartel activity is down 85% in areas where communities have adopted what they're calling the Desert Winds Protocol. Unity, documentation, mutual support. Martinez joined them, looking energized despite the early hour. "It's not just about statistics," she said. "The whole culture has changed. People aren't afraid anymore. They're organizing, standing together, refusing to let criminals control their communities." Thomas watched as more vehicles arrived. Business owners seeking advice, community leaders sharing success stories, ordinary people who'd found their courage and wanted to help others find theirs. "You know what really destroyed the cartels?" he asked the gathered group. Not just the arrests or the seized assets. It was showing people something they'd forgotten, that fear only has power when you face it alone. Sir Carlos, now running security training programs across 3 states, was setting up for the day's workshop. "Every week, we get calls from new communities wanting to learn. They see what happened here and realize they don't have to live under cartel control." The bullet-scarred wall had become a symbol of transformation. Visitors would touch it, take photos beside it, draw strength from what it represented. "Each mark tells a story," Sarah explained to a group of shop owners. "Not just of violence, but of a community that refused to break." Thomas's phone buzzed constantly with updates from across the country. A neighborhood in Texas that had driven out cartel influences. A trucking route in New Mexico that had become impossible for criminals to control. Each victory building on the lessons learned at Desert Winds. "The cartels don't understand what's happening," Torres noted. "They're used to fighting against law enforcement, rival gangs. But how do you fight against communities that refuse to be intimidated? How do you threaten people who stand together?" Maria, serving coffee with steady hands that once trembled at the sight of cartel vehicles, shared her perspective. "A year ago, I was so afraid. Now, I teach other grandmothers how to organize neighborhood watch groups. Fear transforms into strength when you're not alone." The morning sun climbed higher as more people arrived. Desert Winds had become a hub of resistance, but not in the way the cartels understood resistance. This wasn't about weapons or violence. It was about unity, courage, and the power of communities standing together. "Remember what El Fantasma said?" Martinez mused. "About being a soldier playing at being a businessman?" That was his mistake. He thought this was a military battle, never realizing it was really about the human spirit. Thomas nodded, watching the diverse group gathering in the renovated diner. "The cartels understand force, corruption, intimidation, but they don't understand the power of hope. When people see others stand up and win, it changes everything." The workshops had evolved over the year. Now they focused not just on security measures, but on building lasting community resilience, how to create support networks, how to document and share information, how to turn individual courage into collective strength. "You know what's really remarkable?" Torres asked, reviewing the latest reports. "It's not just communities fighting back anymore. It's communities transforming themselves. Where cartels tried to build networks of fear, people are building networks of support." Sarah had expanded Desert Winds, adding meeting rooms and training facilities. But the heart of the truck stop remained the same, a place where ordinary people could find their courage and learn to stand together. "The physical changes are important," she explained to visitors, "but the real transformation happens in here." She tapped her heart. "When you realize you're not alone, that others will stand with you, that's when everything changes." As noon approached, Thomas received news that would have seemed impossible a year ago. The last major cartel operating along the border had surrendered, citing the impossibility of maintaining control in areas where communities had united against them. "They're learning," Martinez said with satisfaction. "The old methods don't work anymore. You can't intimidate people who refuse to be afraid. You can't isolate communities that stand together." The afternoon brought more visitors, more stories, more evidence of the transformation spreading across the nation. Every person who walked through Desert Wind's doors carried away not just strategies and tactics, but something more precious, hope. "That's what El Fantasma never understood," Thomas told a gathered group. "He thought power came from making people afraid. Real power comes from helping people find their courage." As evening approached, the truck stop remained busy. The spirit that had defeated Los Serpientes hadn't faded. It had grown stronger, spreading like wildfire across communities that had lived too long in fear. "You know what we really built here?" Torres asked, as they watched the sunset paint the desert sky. "Not just a defense against cartels. We built a template for how communities can transform fear into strength." The desert wind carried the scent of sage and victory, and with it the promise of more transformations to come. What happened at Desert Winds wasn't just about one community's stand against evil. It was about showing others that resistance was possible, that unity was stronger than fear, that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they stood together. The battle that began when a cartel targeted the wrong veteran at the wrong truck stop hadn't ended. It had evolved into something more powerful, a movement of hope, courage, and transformation that would continue to grow, continue to inspire, continue to light the way for others long after the last traces of cartel influence had faded into history. And somewhere in his prison cell, El Fantasma might have finally understood his greatest mistake. He hadn't just lost a battle or an empire. He'd awakened something far more powerful, the unshakable spirit of communities that had discovered their strength, their courage, and their power to stand together against any threat. The legacy of Desert Winds would live on, not in bullet holes or battle scars, but in the transformed communities, the renewed hope, and the unshakable knowledge that when people stand together, no force of darkness can prevail against the light of their united courage. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.